imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. So I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's live edition. It is June 5th, 2013. Tonight I have a very special guest that I'm bringing live to the airwaves for you tonight. She's a lady who's been on my broadcast numerous times before, but not since I have been here at Unbound, and I am pleased to bring her to the airwaves for you tonight. And I'm going to bring her up really quick because you all know the first segment is a quick, short segment. So I'm going to bring her up and introduce her. And then when we come back from the short break and we get to the longer segment, the nice 14.5-minute one, I'm going to get into detail with her. I'm going to pick her brain a little bit about who she is, her book, and then we're going to get into some details about what's in her book and other things pertaining to the JFK assassination, because that's what we're going to be discussing tonight, is the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So let me bring up my guest really quick before we go to break. She is a real-life criminal forensic investigator, okay? So we actually have a real CSI in the house, ladies and gentlemen. I always refer to her as, if you know anything about the TV show CSI, which a lot of people do, the redhead Catherine Willows. Well, we have our own real-life version of Catherine Willows here, okay? Her name is Sherry Fiester, and she is one of the smartest ladies I know. And I'm proud and honored to bring her to the airwaves for you all tonight. Sherry, welcome back.
Popeye, thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
I love having you on. I love being able to pick your brain. You really have a knack for cutting through the garbage and getting to the heart of what we need to be looking at when it comes to the forensics of the JFK assassination. And ladies and gentlemen, I've talked to Sherry plenty of times offline too, and she always makes my brain turn into this huge thunderstorm. Every time I have a conversation with her, it's always, just going off, and I'm picking up things here and there. So, Sherry, I'm just really glad to have you on. I'm going to cut us off because we're sneaking up to the break here. But when we get back on the other side, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have Sherry introduce herself a little bit to the newer listeners here at Unbound. Tell you all a little bit about herself, and we're going to get into her book. And if you don't know about it, by the end of today, you're going to want to purchase it, I promise. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just one short minute. One quick short minute. Don't go anywhere. All right, we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Nice long segment. Sherry, I'm going to give you the floor. I want you, really quick, just to take a few minutes, introduce yourself a little bit to the newer listeners. Kind of like we did the first broadcast you're on. why should anybody take what you have to say seriously as a forensic investigator? What are your credentials? Now, I already know, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, by the end of today's show, you will too. But I have to set it up that way so so Sherry can have the floor. So, Sherry, the floor is yours, my dear. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your book, and then we'll go from there.
My name is Sherry Fiester, and I'm the author of Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination, which was released in November of last year. I'm a retired forensic investigator and court-recognized expert in Louisiana State Federal Court and in 30 judicial districts in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. I've been certified as an expert in the fields of crime scene reconstruction, crime scene investigation, and blood spatter analysis and reconstruction. I'm published and recognized as an instructor in those fields at both state and national levels. In 1995, I started applying my expertise to the Kennedy assassination. And in 1995, I spoke at the Coalition of Political Assassinations conference in Washington, D.C. As one of the speakers. I had talked about one of the very first times that forensic was used to prove a front shot, and I talked about blood spatter analysis at that time. And then the very next year, I was a featured speaker at the Dealey Plaza Echo Kennedy Assassination Conference in the United Kingdom. Since 1996, I have been a regular presenter at the JFK Lancer November in Dallas conferences, and I'm a recipient of the prestigious JFK Lancer Mary Farrell New Pioneer Award that's given in recognition of contributions of new evidence in advancing the study of the assassination of President Kennedy. So now I'm retired, and I am utilizing various forensic fields to promote a better understanding of the Kennedy assassination. And the results of that is the book Enemy of the Truth, where I look at 8 different myths concerning the assassination, and I apply contemporary forensic techniques to them to determine whether or not they are actually true.
And you do have a hell of a job.
Thank you.
No, it really is a good book. I mean, I don't give, you know how I am about books, especially when it comes to the JFK assassination. I don't give ratings very easily, especially high ratings. And your book is really good, Sherry. You know, when you first sent it to me, like I didn't even realize, I didn't know who you were. You sent me your book. You said, hey, you might be interested in this. I understand you're a JFK researcher. You know, I've heard a couple of your shows. Check this out. You might like my book. Let me know. Right. And I skimmed through 2 paragraphs really quick, and I was like, wow, I need to contact her. Because your book, within 5 minutes, just started. I told you, like, just talking to you makes my brain fire, but reading the book did the same thing, and it made me start to have all these questions and ask all these questions. That's when I called you that one night. Remember, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I called you really late, and we started talking about where the possible locations of the shooters and this and that.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that your book does. It just gets people's brain to be active. Look, if you're interested in the JFK assassination, ladies and gentlemen, and a lot of people love CSI and, all these NCIS and these other cop shows where they have a forensic, clip to it, or maybe it's the whole thing is based on forensics, whatever. Everybody likes that stuff on TV. Well, how about we take that stuff, the real aspect of that, and actually apply it to a real life horrific crime that has not yet been solved? Because let's be honest, the assassination of the president was not solved. Even the House Committee on Assassinations said that there was a conspiracy to kill JFK, MLK, and I think they even said there was a conspiracy to kill Bobby, if I remember correctly. But they definitely said that there was enough evidence to prove that there was definitely a conspiracy to kill Jack. So, no, the case hasn't been solved. And again, your book is one of those books out there that if people are interested in researching it, they need to get. There's a lot of stuff in it. I mean, we've gone over it in the 2 previous shows we've done about a lot of the evidence about your book. One of the things that I liked that you picked apart was the famous magic bullet theory, and that's obviously the government's whole story is the magic bullet theory, and you don't agree with it. I mean, you can say that as a forensic investigator, their magic bullet theory is bunk, right?
Absolutely. And, that's one of the things that's important about this particular book, Enemy of the Truth. A lot of people have a theory, and they write a book about their theory. I'm not writing about a theory. I'm writing about forensics, forensics that is proven, forensics that are used in court every day worldwide, forensics that have a lot of peers that are saying the exact same thing. It's found in professional publications and in books that are easily accessible to the average person. And when you look at the information that we have for the single bullet theory, the Warren Commission is asking us to believe that a bullet struck President Kennedy in the back of the neck, passed through his neck without striking bone, exited the front of his throat, then traveled to Governor Connally, hitting him in the back at his right armpit, damaging 4 inches of his 5th rib before it exits his chest below the right nipple. Then continued forward, struck his right wrist, shattered the radius bone, exited the base of his palm, and then went into his left thigh just above his knee, penetrating about 3 inches beneath the surface, struck the femur, deposited a small lead fragment before it stopped, and then somehow was expelled from that wound in his thigh, escaped his clothing, escaped notice by anyone, was deposited on a stretcher that was moved to the hallway of Parkland Memorial Hospital and was later found. So that bullet became the foundation of the Warren Commission's theory that a single assassin was responsible for the shooting of President Kennedy and Governor Connally. If there's any deviation from that conclusion, then it suggests there's a second assassin. And you know, the Warren Commission did not declare that they had proven the single bullet theory. And all of the members did not accept the possibility of a single bullet wounding both men. What they did was just declare that their inability to prove the validity of the single bullet theory was just inconsequential. And I don't think very many people know that. But by its own admission, the Warren Commission did not demonstrate the single bullet theory correct. In fact, in the Warren Commission report on page 19, they actually say, and I'm quoting, although it's not necessary to any essential findings of the Commission to determine just which shot hit Governor Connally, there's very persuasive evidence to indicate that the same bullet which pierced the president's throat also caused Governor Connally's wounds, and that's in the Warren Commission report on page 19. Then on page 107, they say the alignment of the points of entry was only indicative and not conclusive that one bullet hit both men. The exact positions of the men could not be recreated. Thus, the angle is only approximated. So people believe that the Warren Commission is stating that the single bullet theory is correct. And if they believe the single bullet theory, they believe more than the Warren Commission believed.
Yeah, I don't buy the single bullet theory. First of all, I mean, it just doesn't add up. But all I'll say is, to quote Kevin Costner, back and to the left, how does the bullet come out and then turn around and hit him in the forehead? Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. I know they're working on ammo that turns corners now, but they didn't have it 50 years ago.
You know, it's the strange thing about the Warren Commission. In December of 1963, the FBI said, we have one bullet that injured President Kennedy with his non-fatal wounds, but it didn't cause a throat wound. A second bullet hit Governor Connally, and President Kennedy was fatally wounded by bullet number 3. Then, in January, just a little more than 5 weeks later, Lee Rankin, who was general counsel for the commission, said, we have a problem because we have photographs that show that the bullet entered the back below the shoulder blade and it doesn't align with the throat. So in March, they released a different statement. And they said, well, we think that the bullet that caused Kennedy's back wound caused his throat wound, and then a second bullet injured Governor Connally, and then he was fatally wounded by bullet number 3. And then in April, a week later, 7 days later, they decided that they needed to do something about James Tague, and they said, well, okay, we're going to change our story now, and we're going to say that Kennedy and Connally were injured by a single bullet, one bullet missed, and then the third bullet was fatal, killing President Kennedy. So, I mean, they issued like 4 different statements before they finally came up with the single bullet theory in April, about the 21st of April in 1964. And they said, well, we're going to have to prove it. So in May 1964, the FBI did a reenactment. But the problem was they still couldn't prove it. They couldn't do it with photographs. They couldn't do it with the reenactment. They couldn't get it with any angles right. They couldn't get the timing right. They couldn't get the governor and President Kennedy in the correct position. But they said, you know what, we're going to put it in there anyway. And the Warren Commission's internal memo, Alan Dulles said, you know what, it's not going to matter because people don't read. People don't read in this country. A few professors might read this, but the public will read very little. And that was in September of 1964. But the thing is, people do read. And in the report, they read that the single bullet theory doesn't actually work. So the people that say, I support the Warren Commission, then they cannot possibly support the single bullet theory.
It just doesn't make any sense. Their whole story doesn't add up. I mean, the FBI even tried to. They actually had their best sharpshooters, and you know these guys are professionals. They could not make the shot that Oswald supposedly could, and Oswald has or had what Marines call Maggie's drawers, which means he sucked at shooting. He could not hit the broadside of a barn. I'm not making fun of Lee. I'm just saying his shooting skills were not up to par with that of a marksman or a sharpshooter in the Marine Corps, okay, or in the at all in the military. And I'm supposed to believe that this guy, who's got semi-adequate shooting abilities, when it comes to using a rifle like that, takes the world's largest piece of crap rifle, okay, nicknamed the humanitarian rifle. Not kidding. That's what the Carcano, if he used it. Of course, I've seen reports about the Mauser. Now, the Mauser would have been a more accurate rifle if they were going to use a bolt-action rifle for sniping. The Mauser that they said they originally found, and that I remember reports of even a police officer holding up outside. The Mauser would have been more useful than the Carcano, but the Carcano was in the official story, and that gun. Again, humanitarian rifle, that's what the Hungarian army nicknamed it because it was a piece of crap. And I'm supposed to believe that someone who's not a marksman, did not qualify as a marksman, right, is able to take this piece of crap rifle and pull off 3 shots where the first shot is actually the lousiest shot and the third shot is the best one. That doesn't make any sense. First, you would think it would be the other way around, where the first shot would be the best one, the second one would be the and then the third one would be the worst of the 3 because he was firing. At this point, by the time the third one comes out, it would be rapid fire, right, or faster fire, especially for a rifle. And you don't have that. You have the exact opposite, where the headshot, the fatal, the third shot, right, according to them, that's the one that bam. Right on target into his forehead. That's a hard shot, especially at a moving target.
Right. There's so many things that are wrong with the single bullet theory. It's unbelievable. And, that's one of the things that the House Select Committee was interested in looking at. The House Select Committee had 2 panels that worked under it that looked at the single bullet theory. One was the photographic panel, and they were to decide exactly when the shots occurred. And they picked different times and different frames corresponding with different frames of the Zapruder film. But the other thing that they did was that they had a forensic pathologist panel that was...
Sherry, I'm gonna pause us right there because the break is sneaking up. But when we come back on the other side of the break, I want to get into this. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. About 2.5 minutes, we'll be right back. You don't want to miss this, I promise. We are back. I want to get right back into it where we got cut off because, this is a short segment. We got about 5.5 minutes here. So, Sherry, just when the break snuck up on us there, you were getting into and I'm doing air quotes, the investigation of into the assassination of President Kennedy. They also brought out a forensic, or I guess their own version of a forensic panel, is what you were saying?
Right. The House Select Committee had a panel of forensic pathologists that looked at the wounds, and what they were trying to determine were what the angles were, so that they could prove that the single bullet theory was correct. Now, the House Select Committee does support the single bullet theory, but they just think that the angles that the Warren Commission suggested were wrong, and the time that the victims were shot were also wrong, with the exception of the headshot that you see at frame 313 in the Zapruder film. But the interesting thing about the House Select Committee is that they had these different panels trying to come up with the angles. And in addition to the pathologist, they also had a man by the name of Thomas Canning, who worked for NASA, and he was commissioned to do an actual reconstruction of the shooting itself, and that would mean to determine what the trajectories were. And so he goes to the House Select Committee and he sets up his displays for explaining his report, and one of the members said, "I see by your exhibits that you have 3 trajectories." And he says, "That's right. I have 3 trajectories." Downward from Kennedy, the Warren Commission said it was 17 degrees. The House Select Committee with Thomas Canning said it was 25. That can't be 17 and 25. It has to be one or the other. That's going through Kennedy. But the interesting thing was the House Select Committee pathology panel said, no, it's not 17 degrees, it's not 25 degrees, it's 90 degrees. We believe that this is a flat, head-on, straight through from the back of the neck and out from the front of the throat. So you have a 17, a 25, and a 90-degree angle. Or it would be a 0-degree angle because it's to the horizontal. It would be 0. And then right to left, from the Texas School Book Depository to Kennedy, right to left was 26 degrees. Through Kennedy was 18. From Kennedy to Conley was 12, and then through Conley was 27. So we have downward 17, 25, and 90, or 0, depending upon if you want to look at it like that. And then right to left, 26, 18, and 12. Now, how can a single bullet do all of those things? It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. So I think that just by looking at those numbers, and these are things that are in the official reports, it's not something that I reconstructed, I think that we can see that the single bullet theory just doesn't work.
It doesn't work, period. It
Right.
just does not work at all. And when you, again, shot from the back, yet his head is thrust violently backwards, as if he was hit from the front. So
Absolutely.
how does the bullet, again, even if it was a second shot, if they say, well, okay, it wasn't the quote-unquote magic bullet, but it was a second shot, how does Oswald supposedly hit somebody in the front of the forehead? And I like their excuse is the bullet passed through his head and then came out the front, and that was exhaust gas from the bullet pushing his head back, or something to that effect.
Right.
Are you kidding me? Anybody that's even shot a watermelon or a tree or any sort of target, even paper targets. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. Look at what a paper target looks like, Sherry, when you shoot it with a gun. What happens?
Exactly.
The paper on the back half is all pushed outwards. Kind of like if you broke a window. If you bust the window from outside, it's going to show because most of the glass will be inside, as if you punched it and it went in. Same thing if it were inward going out. And the same thing kind of works when you get shot in the head. Putting all the forensics aside for a second, which is super important, just looking at the headshot, when you see his head go violently backward, any question as to where that shot came from? Of course, it came from in the front, but they can't have that because if the shot comes from the front, well, it's physically impossible for Oswald to be in 2 places at the same time. Therefore, it would be 2 people, and it kills the lone gunman theory. I'm going to pause it right there because we got a break sneaking up on us. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. When we get back, we're going to have a nice long segment for me to pick Sherry's brain. Go check her book out. We'll be right back. All right, so nice long segment. I want to get back into it with Sherry. Sherry, you were telling me during the break, and I know that some of this exists, but I want to get into it a little more in detail for the listeners. The science that actually supports a shot coming from the front and hitting President Kennedy in the head. Instead of actually, they like to say, well, the evidence proves. No, actually, the evidence doesn't prove what you say. The evidence proves that there was a front headshot. So go ahead, the floor is yours, and get into it.
In the years since President Kennedy was assassinated, there's been a lot of studies that focus on ballistics. The ability to develop accurate methods in establishing projectile trajectories and understanding wound ballistics has now allowed us to scientifically establish the direction of projectiles and to establish the direction of the projectiles that struck President Kennedy. And by doing that, we can determine whether or not we have a single rear shooter or we have a front shooter, which would establish a conspiracy. And there's 5 ways that you can scientifically determine the direction that a bullet strikes the head. There's beveling, fracture sequencing, projectile fragmentation, target movement, and blood spatter. And those are the things that I look at in my book, Enemy of the Truth. The first thing is beveling. When a bone is struck by a bullet, it creates a little hole in the skull that has marginal defects around the margin that are kind of cone-shaped. These little fractures appear as sometimes symmetrical chipping out of the bone, making a little indentation surrounding the entry or exit point when there's an impact. The small end of the cone touches the side of the bone from which the bullet entered. So if you have an entry wound and you look at that, it will just look like a smooth hole. But if you're inside the head looking towards the entry wound, then you would see the defects on the inside of the bone that had been chipped away. So for many years, people have looked at those beveling characteristics and determined whether or not you had a entry or exit wound. And they did say in many of the older studies that tangential gunshot wounds to the head or angled wounds would create sometimes elliptically shaped defects that had both internal and external beveling. Now, we now know that there is sometimes pseudo-beveling or false beveling in high-velocity distance shots. And it has to do with the transfer of kinetic energy to the skull. And it dislodges little chips of the bone, and they flake off around the entry wound edges, producing what looks like beveling that would have come from an exit wound instead of the entry wound. And there are several studies that now tell us that there's a couple of books, and I'll just give a quick reference for people that want to look it up. Levy, L-E-V-Y, in 2012, Adams in 2010, Prahow, P-R-A-H-L-O-W, in 2010. And these people all state now that we know that current forensic research, it appears to show that beveling cannot provide conclusive evidence of projectile direction. And that is what the Warren Commission relied upon, and it is the only thing that they relied upon. So they didn't have that information at that time, but now we do. So now we know that beveling out of those 5 things is not necessarily something that can be definitely conclusive. And so we may want to exclude that in this case. Then there are fracture patterns. When the projectile strikes the skull, there are 2 kinds of patterns that are created in the fractures. First are radial fractures, which extend from the wound in the continued direction of travel. So if you're struck in the forehead, they're going to move towards the back of the head. And then there's internal pressure from temporary cavitation that produces pressure against those and creates concentric or kind of fractures that connect those, kind of like looking at a part of a spider web. imagine you had a pie slice out of a spider web, and you have these long radial fractures, and then the little ones that connect them. We now know that research shows that the sequencing of the radial and concentric fractures in gunshot injuries to the head can tell us where the point of impact was. And again, those are in new studies in Vail 2009, Carger 2008, Lastema in 2009. So the Clark panel actually, before the Warren Commission, looked at the fracturing that's in the x-rays, and they specified there was extensive fractures from the midline of the frontal bone, that's talking about the forehead, in the front, towards the back of the parietal bone, which is the back of the head. And it says that that is where the fracturing appears to begin. So if the Clark panel says that that's the place that it begins, and when we look at the Assassination Review Board, they also have people that say the same things, and we can look at those x-rays and see the distinct radial fractures propagating from the front of the head. Then we can look at that current research and correspond it to what we see there and what's documented in the reports, and say that fracture patterns in this x-ray, which we know to be proven to be President Kennedy's head, show that the bullet struck him in the front of the head. So we have at least one definite thing that says we have a front shot. Then there's target movement. When you look at the Zapruder film, frame by frame, there is one frame where President Kennedy's head moves slightly forward and down, that's 313, when the gunshot occurred, and then it starts moving backward in response to the gunshot wound that it's received. In 2008, a German researcher named Bernhard Karger did ballistic studies on wounds, and that study showed that the initial transfer of kinetic energy to the target causes the target to move minutely into the force. And I know this is going to sound very complicated, but in Newton's law it says, you know, every force has an equal and opposite reaction to it. So what happens is you have a little bullet that's pushing, and it doesn't weigh very much, but the weight of the head weighs more. And as that energy transfers, the head outweighs the bullet and moves it slightly forward, and then the force of the bullet overcomes the weight of the head and pushes it backwards. So that 2008 study was also looked at by Kuplan in 2011, and that research was confirmed with ultra-high-speed photography that documented the forward movement into the line of fire that was referenced by Karger. So we now know that that forward movement followed by the rear pronounced movement is consistent with a single shot from the front. So we have two things now. We have the fracture pattern and the target movement that say forensically this is a gunshot from the front. Then we have bullet fragment distribution. When a bullet strikes the head, if it is designed to fragment, it starts to fragment and it opens up in a kind of a cone shape. So if you're looking at it from the side, it would be like a cone, and the apex or the point of that cone is closest to the entry wound. And that has been documented since 1998. It was documented in the House Select Committee and the AARB, the Clark panel, and they're all actually, Larry Sturtevant testified that the majority of metallic fragments are typically deposited closest to the entry wound. That's in the House Select Committee report. So we have multiple forensic publications that indicate that the fragment pattern that we see in President Kennedy's x-rays depict a front shot from the head. So that is now only leaving us with one other thing, and that's the blood spatter. The blood that we see ejected from the entry wound and travels back against the line of fire towards the shooter is what we see in frame 313. It has a very distinct pattern, size, the amount of time that it's created, the amount of time that it is dissipated, the direction that it travels. This study of backspatter was not actually created until the 1980s. The 1983 was the very first study in backspatter, so it's not something that could easily or even in any way faked in the Zapruder film. So we have 4 out of the 5 ways to determine projectile travel, direction of travel, all say that it's a front shot that struck President Kennedy in the head, and just with one deemed unreliable, and the other 4 from the front. So all of these things meet the evidentiary standard that's required to support a criminal conviction in today's courtroom. If we went to court today with that information, then we could prove that we would have a front shot. So science definitely supports a front head shot.
And yet, where's the mainstream media on this? I hear crickets.
Yeah.
I don't
Absolutely.
hear anybody talking about this. And when you see scientists or professionals asked their opinion about it, they'll all say, "Oh, the evidence proves that it was a lone gunman and it was all walled in the book depository." It just absolutely. I don't even know how to describe how angry I get, because it's like, look, man, the evidence is right in front of you, and it's no longer, I haven't seen any scientific evidence. No, you have it right here. Sherry is a forensic investigator. Okay, so now when people go, "You crazy, kooky conspiracy theorist, there's no science to back up what you say." Well, she didn't come up with the science. She just actually did the work and put it all together in her book. By the way, before I forget, plug where they can get the book and plug the name of it again.
Okay, the name of the book is Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination. And you can buy it on Amazon, at Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, all of the places that you would normally buy books online. You can also buy it at jfklancer.com and on my website, sherryfiester.com. If you buy it there, I'll sign the book for you.
Where's the best place to buy it, Sherry, that supports you the most?
Probably at my website, supports me the most.
Okay, well then do that first. Try going to her website first, and then all the other options. That way, because I know sometimes Amazon you have to give a discount or whatever with the book and everything else. I know how that works. All the other authors I've had on have always said the same thing, that Amazon is great to get the book out there, but it does kind of stink because the author of the book doesn't actually make what they should on the book. So if you want to help out Sherry and support her future work, because she's working on other books, ladies and gentlemen, hint, 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 hint. So stay tuned for her future work. But go to her website and support her. I always tell you to get a physical copy of books. I preach that to the listeners left and right. You can get, people can say, "Oh, well, eventually I'll get a PDF of it." No. You want a physical copy of her book. Okay, you want a physical, and I believe, I don't know if there's any PDFs out there of it, but I think the only way you can get it right now is the physical copy. So guess what? She's going to force you to use your brain and sit down and turn off all the electronics and just, you and the book. You're going to get personal with it again. And I promise you won't regret it. Really, you won't. I have the book, ladies and gentlemen. I've read it. Okay, I've read it myself, and it is a really good read. Once you start reading it, especially if you're into forensics and all this, and everybody has seen CSI or one of the variants thereof over the course of time, and most people are into that type of thing where they like the, like the Investigate Discovery Channel and all that other crap. Well, here you actually get a chance to hear from a real forensic investigator on something as big as the murder of one of our presidents, which was never solved, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I'm going to pause it right there because we have a break sneaking up on us. Do not go anywhere. Man, hour 1 is almost up already. But don't worry, we still have Sherry for a whole nother hour, and I got a ton of other things we're going to get into. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Just wait, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2. I got a whole bunch of more things to pick Sherry's brain on. And it all dovetails into what we've already been talking about. The headshot, especially. Because I want to get into the type of rifle, possibly the type of rifle used. And possibly, maybe, perhaps even the caliber of ammo, or if there was any special type of ammo used. I mean, this is stuff that, when you look into the assassination, okay, I cover all the aspects of it. You all know that. But when you look into the assassination, there are times you'll hear me say, oh, don't get caught up in the minutia here or there. Well, when it comes to the JFK assassination, the one thing that I do is I cover every aspect, including the minutia. As many of you know, the assassination of President Kennedy is kind of like, I don't know if you'd call it my specialty or whatever, but I guess you could call it that. That's one of the things I know the most about. And when it comes to his assassination, over the course of 50 years, I have seen every type of defense for any type of argument. So yeah, it's important to get into the minutia because then you can destroy any type of logical fallacy or any type of garbage and get right to the core of the matter, just like Sherry does with her book. Okay, it cuts through a lot of the myths. And what's funny is the myths that she destroys really aren't the conspiracy theorists. I mean, a few things here and there, might maybe small scale, but it's mainly she destroys the government's official position on the shooting itself. Okay, and she doesn't do it out of ignorance. She doesn't do it out of coming up with this stuff out of the clear blue. She's using science, and destroying the official story. Okay, and over the course of 50 years, I've seen so many arguments get destroyed because they lack the intricate detail, the minutia. Okay, so when it comes to Kennedy's assassination, it's important if you're going to take on this argument, because to me and to anybody that understands things, this is one of the linchpin events, because this was when there was a massive coup in this country 50 years ago. This is what led to what we have today, including 9/11 and all this other stuff. Anybody that's researched and understands and is awake what's going on, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that was the beginning of it all, because this goes back further than that. But this is one of those keystone linchpin events. Okay? So it's important for us to get to the bottom of this, because if we can expose that this was done 50 years ago, people like when my father said to me, when I told him about all this stuff, and we got into detail one day, and 9/11 and all this other stuff, he looked at me and he goes, well, if I believe everything that you're telling me, then that means almost everything that I was told by these, by the powers that be, my whole life was a lie. Bingo. And that's important for people to realize, even if it's a hard truth, because that will enable us to, hey, look, that's part of I have a problem. Now let's deal with that problem, right? Instead of there is no problem, there is no problem. So you have to get into the minutia. It's important. And in hour two, I'm actually going to pick Sherry's brain about an article that I wrote about the weapon used and everything else. But Sherry, we have about 2.5 minutes left before we go to break. I think I know I've preached the minutia, here and studying it and getting into it. But really quick, I mean, do you agree? Don't you think, or do you have a different take on it? I mean, I would assume that knowing your background and knowing your book, that you would agree it's important to have information about these details, because look what you were able to do with your book.
I do think it's important that we look at some of the details, especially the ones that make the difference between determining, is there more than one shooter? And I've had a lot of people say one of the great things about Enemy of the Truth is that it's an easy read, and you don't have to be a scientist to understand it. You don't have to have a college degree. It's easy enough that everyone can relate to the information there, and the references and citations are there if you want to look them up and read them for yourself. But the important thing that I think, why I included that, is because when someone tells you something, the ability to say, no, that's not true, and this is why, is absolutely critical. It really is. So, yes, I think that there are some things that we absolutely need to know, and I think that Enemy of the Truth uses scientific foundation in order to look at some of that minutia. So I have to agree, yes, I think you're right. I think we do need to look at some of it.
Yeah, and I know it's easy to get caught up in it, and it's very time-consuming, and there are tons of it. But in order to, separate the wheat from the chaff, you have to go through it. Again, during the break, before we came on air tonight, I was talking to you about, I was reading Garrison's book, again, his second book, or excuse me, his first book, about the Kennedy assassination and his investigation into it. And I noticed something, which I'm going to bring up in the second hour, because we're sneaking up to the break here. But it was, again, going through the book, reading it a second time, going over it line by line and paying a little closer attention and reading just a little bit slower, and I picked something out of the minutia that jumped off the page at me. And that's going to segue us into hour two. So I'm going to leave it right there for the listeners. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in again 1 short minute, literally 1 short minute, and we'll be back. So don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is June 5th, 2013. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com, and tonight I am hanging out with my special guest and friend, Sherry Fiester, the author of one of the most compelling books on the JFK assassination, I will say. And I'm not just saying that because she is my guest. She would not be my guest if I did not think it was a good book. I think by now you all know how I roll and understand that I don't support things that I do not believe in. So, with that being said, this is a quick segment, as you all know. So we got about 3 minutes, and then we'll go to a quick, short 1 minute break. When we come back, I want to get into talking about, again, what I was tantalizing your brains with just a few short minutes ago in the end of hour 1. And what I'll do is I'll segue into what we're going to talk about now. I won't make you wait. And then we'll get into a detail in the longer segment. What jumped off the page of Garrison's book to me was about, and I don't know, it's almost about halfway through the book. He was going over the testimony of people that had been on the ground in Dealey Plaza that day, and people that had looked up at the book depository for one reason or another before Kennedy had come into the plaza there, and they had seen people in the windows. And a bunch of different people described. One guy said he saw what looked like an elderly black gentleman, and then the other person said it could be, they were dark-skinned, could have been Latino, probably Cubans from, the whole, and it wouldn't have surprised me if part of the shooter team were highly trained anti-Castro Cubans that had been pissed off not too long before. Okay, so that would not surprise me at all. In fact, that fits the actual MO of the conspiracy or the conspirators. So that would make a little sense. Anyway, the one thing that's not what jumped out at me, though. What jumped out at me, and this is what I was telling you, Sherry. What jumped out at me is because I've been trying to figure out, this has been bugging me. Because, and I forget who brought the question up to me, but somebody had posed a question about shooting, the position of the shooters, and that got me into thinking hardcore. And I mean, I was already thinking about it, and then you and I had a conversation about it, and I had, said, well, maybe if I was going to be the shooter, this, or if I was going to set the teams up, this is where I would put the shooters, or if I was a shooter, this is where I'd want to be, whatever. And then after I had you on the last time, I wrote an article about the possible types of weapons used, because I suddenly had an epiphany as to, perhaps it wasn't a bolt-action rifle used to kill the president. Because everybody, including Oliver Stone, when you see the movie, the assassins are using bolt-action rifles. And part of this epiphany also hit me when I kept watching his little remake of the clip, and I kept watching it over and over again, and I noticed that they were all using bolt-actions. And I said, I know they always say that 2 shots coming almost simultaneously on each other from behind is proof that there were 2 gunmen. I say that the second shot in the front is the proof, but the 2 shots from behind coming on top of each other would be possible by one person. All they would need is a semi-automatic rifle. Pop, pop. Or, if you're a little bit faster, pop, pop. Like a, quote-unquote, a double tap, right? Maybe a little bit slower of a double tap, but you could come almost right on top of each other with a semi-auto as opposed to using the bolt action. So that was the epiphany that I had. And I'll tell you what jumped off the page of Garrison's book at me when I was rereading it. Again, the minutia, when we come back. Don't go anywhere. We are back with a nice long segment. All right, so now that you have a little bit of background and you understand where my mind is, I wanted to let you understand the page I was on. You know what I mean? Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted you to understand where I was. See, Sherry already knew what I was thinking and the thinking behind it. But I needed to get you on the same page. So I'm looking at it like, perhaps it was a semi-automatic rifle or more than one semi-automatic rifle used. Obviously, it was two shooters, but perhaps they used a combination of bolt-action, semi-automatic, or perhaps they just equipped all the shooters with semi-automatic because Kennedy could not be allowed to leave that plaza alive. And honestly, if it's a situation like that, and if I was running it and we had the technology of semi-automatic, which they did, and they were accurate, which they were and still are, because some of the same technology and same weapons are still around today, if I was running the operation, I would have made sure all my shooters had semi-autos, not bolt action, for the specific reason that if they missed with the first shot, they would still have time to go rat-a-tat-tat if they had to and kill him. Remember, it didn't matter that who had to die and how many people had to die, who got shot once the bullets started going. It really didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was Kennedy could not be allowed to leave that plaza alive. So if I'm looking at it from that way and that angle, and I'm going to equip my snipers to do the most damage, I would give them semi-automatic rifles. So with that in mind, I'm reading through Garrison's book again, his investigation, and it's on the trail of the assassins, if I remember correctly, is the title of Garrison's book. And you need to, ladies and gentlemen, Jim wasn't a perfect human being. He did a few things during his investigation that I might not have agreed with, maybe fighting or not following something here or there. But if you actually read his work, he'll tell you later why he didn't on some of the stuff, and he even admits to some of it, to being a fallible human being. So I have a lot of respect for him. And if you read Garrison's work, you will learn a lot. I mean, he is the only official to bring a trial, an actual trial into court for the assassination of President Kennedy. But anyway, so I'm reading Garrison's book, and this is what I see, Sherry. As I'm going through it line by line, I see everybody talking about the people up in the windows. And this lady, and I can't remember her name right now, but it was the wife of one of the guys, the couple that were there. She said that the one thing she noticed, that the barrel was short on the rifle. And as soon as she said that, my all of a sudden I stopped and I went, wait, what? I went back and I had to read it a few times to make sure I read that right and it wasn't a typo. And it wasn't. It's clearly, obviously written there, that way to be that way. And I looked it up and it's not a typo in the book at all. So it's clear. She said that the rifle barrel looked, and I'm trying to remember the exact words, but it was like oddly short or weirdly short or something. And the first thing that came to my mind was, an M1 Garand's barrel looks kind of short, and from a distance up, high up, to the untrained eye, it would not look like a normal rifle barrel. Because it's not that it's a shorter barrel, it's just that it doesn't stick off the gun itself. It doesn't, some rifles are a little bit longer. Sometimes the hand grip on the gun and the whole make of the gun itself is just maybe shorter. Maybe it's got a shorter stock, so the barrel sticks off longer. I mean, every gun is different. But Garands have this signature. If you want to know anything about guns, the barrel looks shorter, than a normal rifle, especially to the untrained eye. So the Garand is a semi-automatic weapon. And if you don't know, ladies and gentlemen, the M1 Garand is the rifle that won World War II. It was that accurate. Okay? You could snipe with this gun, especially at close range. I mean, I wouldn't suggest you could hit targets even with the iron sights on this thing, and they were accurate. Even with iron sights, no scope, you could hit targets at this thing at a distance. Okay? So Kennedy, front, back, and even if there was a guy in the book depository, okay, and on the grassy knoll, either way, that would be one of the weapons that if I was going to do it with, I would choose, or perhaps the M14 or the M21. Now, during this conversation, Sherry brought up a good point. She said, "Well, what about the AR-15?" And a lot of people are going to go, "Oh, Popeye, AR-15s are blamed today. What are you talking about?" No, stop. The AR-15 dates back to the 60s. Okay, you have to understand where all of this comes from. The M16, the M4, all that stuff dates back to them taking the M1 Garand and trying to modernize it because it was already 20, 25 years old. They were trying to modernize it. Then they had the M14, And then they turned that to the M21 sniper rifle, and then they were looking for a better rifle, and then that led to the AR-15, which led to the M16. So Sherry brought up the AR-15, or M16, whatever. 223. Now that's a small round, in comparison to 7.62, but it's very powerful. It's what we use in the military today. Or 5.56 would be the NATO round, the NATO version of it. It's the same thing. It's 223. Civilians, AR-15 shoots the same ammo. That would be, and I have to say, Sherry, that would be a gun that you could snipe with. People modify them all the time and turn them into sniper rifles. And 223 it's a high velocity ammo, but it's not super powerful like 7.62 that if you hit Kennedy in the noodle, that it's going to go out at the back of his head and continue going and start, hit other people. 223. If you're at close range, maybe, but at the distance, that would be a good round to hit with. Especially like you were saying, it loses a lot of velocity and power and energy upon impact, right?
Right. When you look at the medical evidence for Kennedy and for Connally, for the wounds that they have, we know that there's two different types of ammunition that were used. There's one type of ammunition that was used for the non-fatal wounds, and then the head wound is a different type of ammunition completely. You can't look at the fragments of projectiles in Kennedy's x-rays and then look at the supposed pristine bullet and say, oh, well, these were both fired from the same weapon. Because the bullets are designed to do two different things. And the great thing about the 223 is that it's a very high velocity. It comes in a lot of different bullet weights. And they have, just for instance, this is an average weight of 60 grams. It's traveling over 3,100 feet per second. However, the penetration depth of that particular weapon is less than 6 inches. Now, this is really important because the length of the average adult's head is 6 inches. So if we want to have all of the kinetic energy deposited into the skull at the time of impact and not have any projectile that's actually exiting that could possibly be, number one, matched perhaps to another bullet in the event, because it's going to just fragment into so many parts, and that it's not going to harm anyone else, so that you have a more control over it. The 223 is the perfect weapon, or the perfect ammunition to use. And we know that that ammunition was in use at that time. We know that they had the rifle in order to use it. And so, it's just my personal opinion. It's certainly not a scientific fact, and it's not anything that I would want to go to court on. But we're just talking here and saying this is the kind of ammunition that you would use. Now, the weapon that you're talking about uses the kind of ammunition that would not fragment. And so that is the kind of ammunition that you might expect to see injuring President Kennedy and injuring Governor Connally from the rear. So it's possible that your person, that witness that gave the statement that it was a weapon with a rifle with a very short barrel, is the type of weapon, it could be, that you're speaking of, because the kind of ammunition that those weapons use are jacketed and they are not designed to fragment immediately upon impact.
And if I was a shooter, if I was going to be the shooter, biggest target of their career ever, the President of the United States of America.
Right.
They walked that plaza. They knew every inch before Kennedy and his, Secret Service detail, the lack thereof, landed in Dallas. They knew this months ahead of time. Those guys were in Dallas before the president probably even thought about we're going to have a trip there. Before his the details of his trip were worked out, they had already walked everything. And any experienced shooter would have looked at it and said, well, the guy in the rear, and we've talked about this, the guy in the rear has the toughest shot. because although the president comes right by him, he has to wait until the president is actually in line with everybody else before he starts firing. So once the president is where everybody wants him in the kill box, inside that little kill zone there in Dealey Plaza, then then the firing can begin. And once he starts firing from the get-go, the target is moving and it's moving away. So it's going from large to small. So he's got the hardest shot, and the guy in the front has the easiest shot. So to me, if these guys, and look, ladies and gentlemen, don't think that these shooters didn't plan this, again, months in advance. These guys are professionals, okay? Professionals. Patient. They're hunters, okay? They know. They went and measured. I guarantee you they walked it out and measured it however they measure it, whether they use their feet as a measurement or whatever. They probably, anybody with any type of sniping experience or anything, you'll know what I'm talking about. You would probably use your feet as a unit of measurement, and they would walk it out, and they would know how long their foot is in relation to a foot, and they'd be able to, very close, I would say by inches, be able to figure out exactly the distance. And from that distance, they can say, well, if we use this type of rifle, it might over-penetrate. So we want the guy in the back to have a high-powered rifle, something a little more high-powered, like that won't fragment, like maybe the M21, maybe M14, maybe an M1 Garand. We want to put the guy with the headshot up on the triple underpass. Well, we want him to have something that's equally, semi-automatic, but we want him to have something that the round, because he's going to be, we're going for headshots on him. We don't want over-penetration, even if he hits in the chest. His target's going from small to large, going from far to close. So he doesn't need that chance of over-penetration. And people can say to me, they didn't think into that detail. Really? You're going to tell me the Special Forces guys that were running this stuff, or that were involved with this, didn't have any say in this? You're going to tell me that the experienced shooters wouldn't have thought about this? Because guess what? That's what they do. This is what experienced shooters do. And again, this is the president. I mean, they can't let this guy... I guarantee you, Sherry, they were told, he cannot make it out alive. If he does, you're dead. Do you understand that? So these guys knew it was him or them. So they're not going to take any chance. So to me, for them to go to that extreme detail is not out of the ordinary at all. And I know a lot of the listeners are saying, the triple underpass, what are you talking about? Well, we're going to get into that. Don't worry about that. We've got about a minute before we go to break, but we're going to get into what I mean by the triple underpass. And again, you got to read Sherry's book to get a full understanding of everything that we're talking about. And it won't even, again, it will give you an understanding of the science, but to understand fully what we're talking about, you need to, if you really want to understand the Kennedy assassination, you better turn off your television, turn off your Xbox, purchase some books, and prepare to do a little reading, because it's going to take some time to get up to the knowledge level to understand everything that I'm throwing out there at you guys tonight. And I know it's heavy. I know a lot of this is kind of like information laden, but it's important stuff. Sherry, we got about 25 seconds, 30 seconds before we go to break. Throw out your website and the name of the book again.
The website is sherryfiester.com, and the name of the book is Enemy of the Truth, Myths, Forensics, and the Kennedy Assassination.
And I'll spell it out for everybody really quick. It's SherryFiester.com. Check it out. Purchase the book, ladies and gentlemen. I promise you, I'm telling you, if you're awake, if you're aware, if you have on your Hoffman sunglasses, you know what I'm talking about. Anybody that's seen They Live knows what I'm talking about. If you have on your Hoffman sunglasses and you can see the Matrix code, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you get her book. So yes, I do think that they took the time to walk the plaza and go over the minutia, because these shooters knew that if Kennedy got out of that plaza, I guarantee you those guys were probably killed later on. I mean, maybe not. Prouty did say that there was a special little camp where they had guys like this that they kept specifically for reasons, just like this, and that was the only thing that they did. And then when they were done, they sent them back to their little island getaway. I think it was out around Cyprus or something around there, if I remember correctly. Prouty talked about it. But so even if they didn't kill these guys, even if they were these professionals that they brought in and then just, moved them back out, these guys are going to know that if they don't get this right, that they're, ass is grass basically, and their bosses are going to be the lawnmower. So I would, if it were me and I knew I was taking out oh my God, you're a bad guy, and you've been tasked with taking out President John F. Kennedy. Well, if I've been tasked with taking out Kennedy, I'm going to make sure that I cover every little aspect, even if that means having a shooter with blanks and he doesn't know he's got blanks. That could be very well why, a lot of people, when they say, and this is a little bit of a side subject, but some people will say, well, maybe it was a mixture of, mafia shooters and Cubans and these special hitmen and stuff. And it very well could have been somewhat of a mixture of one or two of them. And perhaps what you would do is you would have the really trained guys, the guys like Prouty talked about. Those would be your animals, the hunters. Those would be the guys that you gave rifles to, with the real ammo that was going to take the president out. Okay, maybe you would take one of the Cuban, the anti-Castro Cubans, or one of the mafia guys, and have him shoot a gun maybe with blanks, right? And you and I have talked about this before, Sherry. A lot of people, when they look at the grassy knoll, okay, and this is going to segue us into the triple underpass, but a lot of people say, oh, the headshot came from the grassy knoll. And Sherry will tell you about this, but the science doesn't really, the forensics doesn't line up with that, we'll say, okay? And I'll let her get into detail, but what I notice is a lot of people always say, I saw a big puff of white smoke from the grassy knoll. And I made this comment the last time. Well, what was the guy shooting from the grassy knoll with, a musket? Because the last time I checked, we used smokeless powder. And I know that you'll see smoke rise from a barrel, or, you can see fire and stuff, but you don't see heavy amounts of big white puffs of smoke come out of barrels anymore. That's why they call it smokeless powder. And usually the smoke you see rising from a barrel is usually from the heat of the barrel, but that's besides the point. And that's only on machine guns, okay? You're not going to... to me, it doesn't make sense. Big white puff of smoke. We got about 2.5 minutes because, again, short segment, but what say you? Big white puff of smoke. I know we've talked about this before, but, for the newer listeners, do you think maybe that could have been diversionary, and that shooter's position could have been just a diversionary position?
Absolutely, I do. I've had opportunity to walk the plaza with a couple of snipers, actually, before I wrote the book. And I've had a couple of people that were snipers, and a person that teaches sniping for the military and then retired military and teaches for the FBI. And that person told me that a diversionary tactic is very, very common, and that many times there'll be something that you see or something that you hear that is simply meant to draw the attention of the witnesses. And that is very important, because what we hear, when we hear something and see something, what we see overrides what we hear. So seeing the smoke made everyone that saw the smoke think that the shot came from that location, regardless of whether or not it was actually smoke from a weapon being fired or from a firecracker or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But what we need to focus on is the things that we can absolutely prove scientifically with the kind of evidence that we could take into a court of law, and not theory, not someone's ideas or their interpretation of whatever happened. But there's not any forensic evidence of a gunshot, meaning there's no medical evidence of a gunshot from the grassy knoll, none whatsoever.
And again, the huge white puff of smoke, just to me, again, yes, you will see a little bit of smoke, okay, sometimes, but not, I saw it from on top of the triple underpass. Again, what's the guy shooting with a Revolutionary War era musket? Really? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to cut it off right there. When we get back in a few short minutes, I'm going to get into what we're talking about with the triple underpass. Don't go anywhere. All right, we are back. So, nice long segment. What have I been talking about that I've been tantalizing you with since the the end of the last long segment through this past segment into this very moment when I keep saying the triple underpass. Popeye, what are you talking about? I thought you thought that the headshot came from the front. I didn't say it didn't. Sherry didn't say it didn't. All I said was I've seen evidence that does not support that it came from the grassy knoll. Now, I think that would either be, now I said this in the past, it could be either a sweeper position, or if I was going to put two guys with semi-automatics, one in the front and one on the back, that's really all you need. Have the third guy there as a distraction, give him something that shoots a lot of, uses a lot of, gunpowder and, maybe shoots blanks like, paper wadding, causes everybody to look in that direction. And where you have the real snipers front and back, that makes sense. So where would they be shooting from in the front? Well, that would be up on the triple underpass. And I'm not just pulling this out of my rear end either. Now, Sherry, you've gone over this, and I know you're not the only person in the universe that's actually said that, the evidence doesn't point that the headshot came from the grassy knoll, that it did come from up on the triple underpass. People say, well, how is that possible? There were people up there and they don't remember anything. Well, if you have a shooter positioned in a vehicle up there, and again, you have the diversion of the guy on the grassy knoll shooting, and he doesn't know he's a diversion. For all intents and purposes, he thinks he's shooting live ammo probably. But he shoots, big puff of white smoke, really loud. Everybody looks over there, and that allows for the gunman up on the triple underpass to shoot. Now, I'm not pulling this out of my butt. There's actual evidence that supports this, right, Sherry?
Yes, there is scientific evidence that helps us to determine where front is. And the way that we look at that is by trajectory analysis, which is used by law enforcement worldwide. These same steps have been in place forever. And I think most people would be able to identify with trajectory by understanding that it is the path that a bullet takes as it travels through the air from the barrel of a weapon until it strikes the target. That's the trajectory of the bullet. And then wound ballistics looks at the trajectory through the target. In straight line trajectory, you have an entry and an exit, and you draw a line from the entry to the exit, and then you extend that line back towards the shooter, and somewhere on that line it's going to intersect with the exact location that the shooter was located. And this is something that's done all the time. You take a victim of a shooting to an autopsy, the exact wound locations and the angle are determined by the pathologist. Then you locate the victim and their wounds within the scene. Most of the time you do that with blood spatter. And then once you do that, you draw the line and you know where the shooter is located. And you do that line most of the time with a laser. So it's something that's very common and something that most people know how to do. So you have these 3 steps that you would use. You would have the location of the entry, the location of the exit, then you would get a vertical angle as from the side, and then you would take the horizontal angle if you were looking above, and you take those 2 angles, and then you were able to determine where the shooter is located. But in this case, we don't have an exact entry or exit point. So we can't do that particular type of trajectory analysis. Instead, we have to use, instead of a straight line trajectory, we use a trajectory cone. And that allows us to determine all of the possible straight line trajectories, both horizontally and vertically, and somewhere within that cone, we know the shooter was located. And so that is what I have done, applied that technique to the Kennedy assassination, and made a determination of where the fatal headshot came from, and it excludes the grassy knoll.
And it has to be of a certain elevation, right? Because
Absolutely.
Of the angle going into the forehead.
Exactly. So everything has to be right, because if everything doesn't work, then you know you've made a mistake. So what we did, or what I did in Enemy of the Truth, was take each step and I show the reader exactly how it is done, and then I apply it to the Kennedy assassination. And I encourage the reader to do the same thing with me, to go through those steps, because I never want people to read the book and just say, I need to believe her because she's a forensic expert. I want people to read the book and say, I truly understand the concept of this forensic technique, and I myself can apply it to the Kennedy assassination and come to a particular conclusion. So that was my goal when I wrote Enemy of the Truth. And so the first step would be to determine the wound locations. And because we don't have a particular entry and exit point, I selected the right front quadrant of the head as the entry point. So the whole front right side of the head is the entry, and the entire right rear quadrant becomes the exit. So I have actually one half of the head is going to include both the entry and the exit. So it's not little points, but it's the entire section of the head. Then the next step would be to determine the direction the projectile is traveling. And we've already done that. We talked about the 5 ways that we could determine trajectory direction, and we've already come to the conclusion tonight that 4 of the 5 say that the shot came from the front, and the one that does not speak to direction is found to be unreliable. And that's the one that the Warren Commission used. And again, these other 4 methods are new. They weren't available. Research had not been done in the 1960s, so this is something that's really fairly new. The next step that we would do is to determine where Kennedy is and what his position is within Dealey Plaza. And this is probably one of the most important things for people to understand. If you look at frame 312 of the Zapruder film, and it's available online in a wide variety of locations, if you look at Kennedy's head, you see that he is not looking at Zapruder. He's looking slightly away from Zapruder. Well, the House Select Committee on Assassinations contacted the guy, Thomas Canning, that I spoke with you, that engineer with the Space Project Division of NASA. And he used photogrammic analysis and established the placement of Kennedy and the limousine within Dealey Plaza at the time of the shooting. And he developed precise placement and orientation of Kennedy's head. And he found that Kennedy's head was turned away from Zapruder approximately 25 degrees past profile, and that his head was tilted to his left, towards his left shoulder, and away from Zapruder about 15 degrees, and was nodding forward about 11 degrees. And then in 2004, Dale Myers, a computer animator, did the same thing using a computer reenactment, and he found that Kennedy's head was turned away 25.7 degrees past profile, which is only 0.7 degrees difference from Canning's, tilted to the left about 18.1 degrees, and nodding forward about 27.1 degrees, with a 2-degree margin of error. And then in 2003, ABC News hired independent experts from Z-Axis Corporation, who is a leading forensic animation company, to assess Myers' work. These are the people that look at the reconstruction of major airline crashes, including the Delta crash in Dallas, U.S. Air in Pittsburgh, the one in Colombia, and Korean Air in Guam. And they also worked on like the Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols Oklahoma City bombing. And they said that the assassination sequence that Myers did from any point of view was done with absolute geometric integrity. So we can very, very confidently say where we think President Kennedy was located and the direction he was looking. And if he's looking 15 degrees beyond profile, when it's reference to Zapruder, and Zapruder is at a 90-degree angle to him, then front of Kennedy is not adjacent to Zapruder. The grassy knoll is adjacent to Zapruder, and it's to the side of President Kennedy. So front is not the grassy knoll. Front is to the side of President Kennedy. So if you have a front shot and not a side shot, then the shot could not have come from the grassy knoll, and that's not where the shooter for the fatal head wound was.
And when you sit and think about it, if you had a guy in the front and a guy in the rear, that's really all you need to take them out, especially if they had semi-automatic rifles, and you have the third guy for distraction. The art of misdirection, just like magicians use. It's misdirection. Hey, the politicians use it to this day. Hey, look over here. Look what we're doing over here in the right hand. Don't look at the left hand. So right. It would make sense. And again, people go, well, then what would they have been in? Well, they could have been in a vehicle. They could have easily put them in some sort of, really nondescript, maybe like white vehicle with no windows, like a van with a sliding door on it or something, and they could have rolled up, opened the sliding door to the side. With a rifle like that, they could have already been set up. They could have had a driver, and the guy could have been sitting with they would have already known. It would have been pre-planned, and they would have already practiced it. They could have had a position, like a chair bolted with a table, and then the rifle mounted to the table. So when they rolled up, all they had to do was a 3-man operation. One guy opened the side door, one guy as the sniper, and one guy as the driver. They literally roll up, open the side door. He takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds, pop, however many shots he has to fire. At this point, probably only one because he's got a good shot. Boom, hits him. Acknowledgement, sliding door closes. Boom, they're off. What is it?
That's right.
15, 25 seconds at the most, and nobody would even be looking and seeing the vehicle stop because they'd be looking over at the grassy knoll. See, everybody thinks that third position, the headshot position, the guy would have to be, he would have had to been stationary and laying still. What would have happened if everything was bolted down to something like I just said? So the rifle and everything was already stationary. Again, they would have walked this and recreated this wherever and done this. So they would have already had this van set up, and they would have had the target set up. They could have had it, set up on a set of rails, a little dolly moving from forward to back, from backward to forward, far away to close, and they could have drove up and taken practice shots. I mean, what would it take, a day, 2 days for a professional to get this stuff down pat once they had all this built? I mean, ladies and gentlemen, it's not that hard to believe. I know Sherry agrees. I mean, and she's a forensic investigator. This could have been done by professionals once they practiced it, like that. And that, as far as I'm concerned, knowing what I know about shooting and knowing what I know about professional hitmen, that headshot didn't have to be from a quote-unquote stationary target where the guy would have had been laying down. They could have, created a stationary target that's not stationary, that has 4 wheels, basically. A moving shooter platform, if you will. And it's a high probability that they did that, especially considering the angle. And again, everybody's looking at the grassy knoll because they see the white puff of smoke and they hear that shot. Nobody sees the van stop, door open, shot go off, van door close, van take off. No one's paying attention to that because it's just traffic, right? That's normally there. The best place to hide something is right out in the open. All right, with that in mind, we're going to break. Do not go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We will be right back with the final segment. Wow, hour 2 just flew right by. Man, every time Sherry's on, time just flies. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. And get her book. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Final segment. Before we finish up here, I want to say thank you to Sherry. Thank you so much again for coming on. Originally, ladies and gentlemen, truth be told, Sherry was supposed to come on last week, Wednesday. But last week, Wednesday, as you all know, I was not on air. In fact, actually, it's been a week ago today since we had to have Lulu put down, my service dog, because she was very ill with cancer. So Sherry, and I had completely forgotten at the last minute I canceled on her. And obviously, I mean, with the situation, but she was very understanding. I mean, I've, guests, it doesn't matter. Sometimes people get pissed if you cancel last minute, but I mean, Sherry's more than just a guest. She is a friend of mine, and she was very also, you were really great, behind the scenes. with supporting me, telling me to, keep my head up and whatnot stuff off air. So I just want to say a big thank you to you for, for all that stuff and, for coming on and for doing what you do, Sherry. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming on and talking to the audience tonight.
It's my pleasure. It really is.
So, all right, wrapping it up here, I want to focus on, I want to stay, the final segment here, I want to stay on this. And you brought up a good point off air. A lot of people don't realize that what we've been talking about tonight, the whole van coming up. And by the way, I didn't talk about this with her off air, though, about the van, that whole thing. Again, that's talking to Sherry, that's brainstorming. But a lot of people don't realize any of this information. And there's a big thing that dovetails into what I said that you brought up while we were during the break. So I'm going to go ahead and let me see. We got about 5 minutes left. So actually we got about 4.5. So go ahead and I'll give you the remainder of the time and tell the listeners what you were telling me about distraction, misdirection, everything during the break.
Right. Okay. If we've established that front is not the grassy knoll, front is actually somewhere in front of President Kennedy. If he were to have raised his head and looked forward, he would have been looking at the very end of the parking lot adjacent to the angled portion of the triple overpass. The triple overpass is straight across the streets and has like little angled winged sections on each end. And that little wing is adjacent to the parking lot for the post office. At the time of the shooting, there was no fence there like there is today, and it was open to the public. And someone could have very easily been in that parking lot. They could have been in a vehicle, in a truck, in a van, whatever, and shot from within that vehicle and then simply drove away. But the interesting thing about firing from in a vehicle, I don't know if the listeners have ever watched a war movie of some type where the sniper is shooting within a building and they're trying to figure out where he is. The reason they can't find him is because when you fire from within the building, the sound is captured within the building, distorting the ability to locate the shooter from the sound. And the same thing happens if you fire from in a vehicle. The sound is captured within the vehicle, and so the people around it can't really figure out where it's coming from. So someone firing from the parking lot or from that little area right there would have had a perfect shot. The president would have been looking directly at them, so a bullet entering the right side would have exited the right side or would have traveled down the right side, because we don't have a bullet that actually makes an exit point there. And it would have also created this movement that we see that's back and also slightly to the left, because if you ever play pool and you shoot on the side of a ball, then it has both forward and angular momentum. So it's going to go back and to the left if you strike someone on the outside edge of their head. So the movement would be right, the angle would be right, and the elevation would be right, because we have to have a vertical trajectory that would allow us to get over the vehicle. And at that point, you have about a 2.1 foot elevation difference, which is more than sufficient for firing a shot over the highest point of the limousine. And of course, all of those numbers are given in detail in Enemy of the Truth. But it is interesting that when you research what is the modus operandi, if you want to say, of professional snipers, they use triangulation. They like to be head-on to their victims. They like to have a way to get away, and they like to use a distraction. And all of those elements are there in the Kennedy assassination.
Well said. Well said. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are literally out of time. Sherry, thank you so much for coming on again tonight. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure as always. Ladies and gentlemen, go get her book. Seriously. Go to her website, sherryfiester.com. Go get the book. I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed whatsoever, as I'm sure you are not disappointed with this broadcast tonight. And with that, we are out of here. Ladies and gentlemen, until tomorrow night, stay safe. I love you all. I'm out of here.